When the power went out in Bridgehaven, neighbors expected cold dinners and missed TV shows. They didn't expect the stench. And they certainly didn't expect police to discover Rachel Wallace, frozen, hidden, and forgotten in the basement of her own home. Her husband? Vanished. But up until that week, everyone said the same thing: he's perfect. Every town has that couple. The ones who seem to have it all: love, success, a picture-perfect life. But what if everything you admired about them was a carefully constructed lie? And what if the truth was so dark, it had to be kept in a freezer? In the quiet, tree-lined town of Bridgehaven, Illinois, Daniel and Rachel Wallace were suburban royalty. They threw the best Christmas parties, adopted the friendliest golden retriever, and posted couple selfies that made everyone on Facebook envious. Daniel, a successful financial analyst in Chicago, always held Rachel's hand in public. He made her laugh during church service. He kissed her forehead after her school assemblies. Rachel, a beloved second-grade teacher, adored by students and parents alike, called him her safe place. But behind closed doors, a much darker story was playing out. And soon, it would unravel in the most horrifying way possible. It started slowly, as these things often do. Rachel began canceling outings with her friends. She withdrew from planning the spring fundraiser, something she normally lived for. Melanie, her older sister, said Rachel had become harder to reach, harder to read. At school, Rachel's colleagues noticed she was dressing more conservatively, quieter during lunch breaks. Just tired, she'd say. Daniel's been under pressure at work. In December, she stopped attending yoga. In January, she stopped showing up to school altogether. But Daniel? Calm, polished, smiling at the mailbox, telling neighbors she was visiting a friend up north to clear her head. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? It wasn't until January 14th that Melanie officially filed a missing person report. Her text to Rachel had gone unanswered for weeks, and the few she received sounded off, dry, robotic, like someone else was writing them. Police showed up at the Wallace home. Daniel greeted them with a hot cup of coffee in hand. "She's fine," he told them. "She just needed space." But something didn't add up. Rachel's purse was still there. So was her phone. Her car hadn't moved. And yet, no one could legally detain Daniel. There was no evidence of foul play. Just a bad feeling, and a wife who'd suddenly disappeared. Then came the March blackout. A windstorm knocked out power across Bridgehaven, and over the next 2 days, neighbors began complaining about a strange odor coming from the Wallace property. Daniel was conveniently on a work trip. Police entered on a wellness check. Inside the basement was an industrial freezer, wrapped in thick tape, leaking fluid and beginning to thaw. Inside, Rachel Wallace, naked, frozen, bent unnaturally at the waist and stuffed into a garbage bag, wrapped in fleece blankets. The body had been in there for weeks, possibly since New Year's. The perfect husband? Gone. Rachel's murder made national headlines. News vans camped outside their once-adored home. Candlelight vigils were held outside Bridgehaven Elementary. Heartbroken parents arrived with cards from their children. One little girl wrote, "I miss you, Miss Wallace. I hope you're an angel now." And Daniel? Disappeared. His last known transaction was an ATM withdrawal 80 miles from town. His phone went dark. His car was found in the lot of a cheap motel. Surveillance footage showed him checking in under a false name. Since then, not a single confirmed sighting. 2 days after the body was found, Rachel's best friend, Angela, turned in a locked journal she discovered in a wooden box in Rachel's art room. It painted a tragic picture. "He watches me when I sleep. He says I'm lucky to have him. I'm starting to believe him. I'm tired. So tired. I wanted to leave. But I didn't know how. If something happens to me, it's him." These weren't isolated entries. They were a pattern, an account of psychological abuse that escalated into domination and control. Rachel had been slowly erased long before her body ever vanished. Bridgehaven will never forget Rachel Wallace. The school auditorium bears her name now. A scholarship fund was started for young girls studying to become teachers. But what haunts the town most isn't how she died. It's that they all thought they knew him. Daniel Wallace wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was hosting barbecues, complimenting kids on their Halloween costumes, laughing in the grocery store aisle. He was everything they wanted to believe in, until the freezer told the truth. Subscribe now as we unveil what happens next, and to support the production of more chilling true crime content that brings real stories, real victims, and real justice to light. He didn't run in the middle of the night. He didn't leave a mess behind. In fact, Daniel Wallace left everything looking like nothing had happened, just like he always did. The car keys, the coffee mug, even the trash was taken out. But one thing was missing. The man the entire town once trusted was gone. The night police found Rachel's body, Daniel Wallace's cell phone pinged one last time. It connected to a tower near a rundown motel outside Rockford, Illinois, about 80 miles from Bridgehaven. By the time detectives arrived the next morning, Daniel was already gone. But he hadn't just disappeared in panic. The way he vanished, calculated, silent, and cold, mirrored the very nature of the crime he left behind. The motel clerk remembered him. Said he was friendly, quiet, used a fake name, Jeremy Collins. He paid in cash. No luggage. Drove in, parked at the far end of the lot, and left before sunrise. Precise. No trace left behind. Daniel Wallace didn't run. He evaporated. For the next 48 hours, police worked non-stop. They issued a nationwide bolo, "Be on the lookout." His face was plastered across every news channel, newspaper, and social media feed. Tips flooded in, sightings from Michigan, Indiana, even as far as Kentucky. Most led nowhere. What authorities found more disturbing was what they didn't find. No ATM withdrawals. No credit card usage. No IP activity. No phone calls. It was as if Daniel had planned this day well in advance. Detective Michelle Alvarez, who had spent 13 years tracking fugitives, called it eerily professional. He didn't just vanish. He scrubbed himself out of existence. 3 days after the manhunt began, authorities found a break in the case. A storage unit Daniel had rented 6 months earlier under a shell name, Chris Warren. The unit, located in a small town called Caneville, was hidden behind a row of dilapidated trailers. Inside, detectives found a duffel bag with $8,400 in cash, a burner phone never activated, a detailed notebook with GPS coordinates, maps, and backup escape plans, a new identity packet, driver's license, social security card, and birth certificate under the name Liam Brooks. This wasn't impulsive. It was blueprint. Daniel had been preparing to disappear long before Rachel went missing. And it raised a new question. Had he always planned to kill her? While the search expanded, investigators began pulling apart the Wallace marriage piece by piece. Daniel's past, once considered squeaky clean, began to rot under scrutiny. Rachel's journal was only the start. Police found email drafts he never sent, angry rants accusing her of emasculating him, of undermining his control. One email ended with the line, "You'll never leave me. I won't let you." Financial records showed Daniel had drained nearly $40,000 from their joint savings over the course of a year. Not for bills or investments, but for cash withdrawals at small rural ATMs. Always below reporting thresholds. He'd also installed a hidden camera system in their home. The footage, found on a hard drive stashed in his office, showed Rachel in nearly every room, often unaware. Even the bathroom. It became painfully clear. Daniel had stopped being a husband a long time ago. He was a hunter and Rachel was his prey. Rachel's sister, Melanie Grant, had stayed mostly quiet in the days following her sister's discovery. But when it became evident that Daniel had outsmarted law enforcement, she went public, with fire. At a press conference, she stood before a sea of microphones, holding up Rachel's wedding photo. He made her think no one would believe her. He made her feel like she was alone. But she wasn't. Not then, not now. And I swear, we will find him. Her voice cracked. The photo trembled in her hands. The next day, a GoFundMe campaign she started to support victim advocacy passed $300,000. Bridgehaven, and now the entire country, wanted justice for Rachel. Then a strange lead came from Milwaukee. A woman named Tracy Fields contacted the tip line. She had dated Daniel briefly years before he met Rachel. She claimed he had used a fake last name and abruptly ended things after she confronted him about his temper. Tracy had filed a police report in 2012 after Daniel allegedly shoved her during an argument. No charges were filed. But her words now carried new weight. He used to say, "No one ever leaves me twice." I didn't understand it then. Now I do. Daniel had a pattern. A deeply disturbing one. Despite all efforts, Daniel Wallace remains a ghost. The FBI added him to their 10 most wanted fugitives list. A $100,000 reward was offered for any information leading to his arrest. Some believe he fled the country. Others believe he's hiding in plain sight, clean-shaven, dyed hair, a new voice. But the most chilling theory? That he's waiting, watching, perhaps even enjoying the chaos he created. Because for a man like Daniel Wallace, control was never just about Rachel. It was about power. And this time he holds it over everyone. Subscribe now as we uncover what happens next. And help us keep telling stories that give voice to victims and expose the monsters behind closed doors. People said Rachel Wallace smiled all the time. In every photo, at every fundraiser, through every PDA meeting, there she was, glowing. But that smile, it turns out, wasn't happiness. It was armor. And inside the pages of her secret life, the truth about her marriage was so much darker than anyone ever imagined. Until her body was found, Rachel Wallace was remembered as Bridgehaven's sunshine. A kind-hearted teacher. A loyal sister. A woman always ready to help others. But it wasn't until her diary was handed over to police that anyone saw the truth. Angela Martin, Rachel's best friend, had stumbled upon it tucked inside a shoebox labeled art supplies. It was wrapped in a faded scarf, hidden behind a stack of unused canvases. She turned it over with shaking hands. "I didn't even know she kept a journal," she told detectives. The first entry was dated June 9th, nearly 8 months before Rachel's death. Today he apologized. Again. He always cries afterward. And I always forgive him. The diary chronicled a year of increasing psychological warfare, quiet, subtle, and devastating. There were no grand explosions. No bruises the neighbors could spot. Instead, it was death by 1,000 emotional cuts. He controls everything. What I wear. Who I text. What I eat. I told him I miss having a job that doesn't make me feel watched. He said, "Maybe you should stop making me paranoid." Rachel detailed how Daniel began demanding access to her phone. Then he started locking her out of the bedroom to teach her lessons. Eventually, he stopped speaking to her for days at a time, weaponizing silence as punishment. When I said I wanted to visit my sister, he stared at me for 5 minutes straight and didn't blink. He said, "You're lucky I let you live this life." What sounded like marital tension to outsiders was, in reality, systematic coercion. Rachel was being emotionally caged. The diary shook everyone who read it. Friends who had once admired their marriage were now haunted by guilt. Angela, tearfully speaking on a morning news interview, said, "I should have asked more questions. I saw her dimming, and I just thought it was stress. But she was disappearing long before she was gone." Melanie, Rachel's sister, added, "She wasn't allowed to grow. She wasn't allowed to speak freely. He broke her down piece by piece." Even the school principal, Mr. Henley, admitted that Rachel had withdrawn that last semester, quieter, more distracted. "We thought it was burnout," he said. "But now, I think she was trying to survive." Investigators began building what they called a love-bombing timeline. At first, Daniel was the dream partner, bringing flowers, planning romantic dinners, bragging about Rachel's accomplishments to anyone who'd listen. But slowly, that affection became conditional. If she disagreed with him, he pouted or yelled. If she wore something he didn't like, he accused her of trying to get attention. If she smiled at someone else, he sulked for days. Rachel wrote, "He doesn't hit me. But sometimes I wonder if that would be easier. At least then I'd know I'm not imagining it." This line struck a nerve online. It went viral. Survivors of emotional abuse began speaking out. Thousands of women flooded forums and comment sections, saying they too had hidden behind smiles. They too had been told, "At least he doesn't hit you." Rachel's words became a movement. In her journal, Rachel mentioned that she'd written emails to herself, drafts she never sent. Investigators found them in a private folder titled Future. They were heartbreaking. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. Not because I wanted to be, but because I waited too long. Daniel told me once that the best place to hide the truth is inside something people love." I think he meant himself. One email, addressed to Melanie, was dated December 27th, just 5 days before her estimated time of death. "He's quieter lately. He watches me more. I caught him reading my messages to you. I think he's planning something." It was the last message she ever wrote. Detectives now believe Rachel had tried to leave before. A receipt found in her purse showed a locksmith appointment scheduled for January 2nd. She never made it. Angela revealed that Rachel had texted her 2 days before that. "If I ask you to come get me, will you?" Angela had replied instantly, "Of course. What's going on?" Rachel never responded. Phone records confirmed her cell stopped transmitting data 2 hours later. Police now suspect Daniel found out and acted before she could take the first step toward freedom. The most chilling part of the investigation wasn't the freezer. It wasn't the storage unit, or even the fake identities. It was the realization that Rachel Wallace was screaming for help, but doing it with a smile. In dozens of Facebook photos from the year before her death, she looked happy, glowing. But when digital forensics experts compared her expressions across the years using facial tension mapping, the change was stark. Her smiles didn't reach her eyes. She was smiling for survival. And now, her story is teaching millions how abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like the happiest couple on the block. Subscribe now as we unveil what happens next, and help us continue producing chilling true crime stories that honor victims like Rachel and expose the warning signs others might miss. They trusted him. Every neighbor, every co-worker, even the detective who first knocked on his door said, "He seemed so normal." But behind that soft voice and warm smile was a carefully crafted lie. Daniel Wallace wasn't just pretending to be the perfect husband, he was pretending to be someone who never existed at all. By the time the public learned what Daniel Wallace had done, many were still in disbelief. "He brought us cookies every holiday," said a neighbor. "He used to mow lawns for elderly couples on our block," another added. But as police and journalists dug deeper into Daniel's life, it became disturbingly clear. This wasn't a man who snapped. This was a man who studied people, learned how to earn their trust, and weaponized it. He knew exactly what image to project: dependable, clean-cut, humble. But the person Rachel Wallace married? He never really existed. Daniel's past had been sanitized. On paper, he was a middle-class kid from Peoria, Illinois, graduated with honors, no arrests, no history of violence. But that's only because he covered his tracks well. Through court records and interviews, investigators uncovered a string of disturbing incidents stretching back nearly 2 decades. When Daniel was just 14, he was removed from his home temporarily after an anonymous tip led social services to suspect he was abusing a younger cousin. The family denied everything, and the file was sealed when no charges were pressed. His high school ex-girlfriend, who initially refused to speak, finally agreed to a statement. He was sweet at first, but when I tried to break up with him, he told me he'd make sure I regretted it. I thought he was just being dramatic. Then my dog disappeared, and my parents got letters in our mailbox about me skipping school. I never skipped. It was like he was setting traps. Daniel attended Northern Illinois University, where he was known for being incredibly smart, but eerily private. His roommates recall him locking his bedroom door, even while inside. He didn't drink, didn't party. He volunteered at local animal shelters and tutored at-risk kids. On paper, he was a model citizen. But behind closed doors, he had a different reputation: manipulative, territorial, and oddly controlling in relationships. One classmate remembered a woman named Lila, who dated him briefly and then dropped out halfway through the semester. She left behind a note on the dorm bulletin board: "Be careful who you trust, especially if they're always smiling." The university couldn't confirm her identity. Lila had changed her last name and left no forwarding contact. Even then, Daniel was building his mask and learning how to erase people who got too close to the truth. The more authorities investigated Daniel's past, the clearer it became. Rachel may have been the only one found, but she wasn't the only one controlled. A woman in Evansville, Indiana, who asked not to be named, came forward with a chilling story. "We met online. I thought he was so kind. He sent flowers, bought gifts. I thought I'd found the one. But then he started showing up outside my work. He'd say it was a coincidence. One day I came home and found a photo of myself sleeping, taped to my bathroom mirror. No break-in. No note. Just that picture. I moved 2 weeks later. She never reported it. She was too scared. But when she saw Daniel Wallace on the news, her blood went cold. I knew it was him. Same smile. Same voice. I'm lucky I got out." FBI criminal analyst Dr. Meredith Shaw released a preliminary profile after reviewing Daniel's history. "He's a textbook example of a high-functioning sociopath," she explained. "He doesn't act out in rage, he acts out in control. He views love as a strategy, people as pawns. And when they challenge his control, he doesn't argue. He eliminates." Daniel didn't kill Rachel in a fit of passion. He planned it. Every interaction, every excuse to the neighbors, every staged text to her sister, every frozen layer of plastic. It was all part of a performance. One built to keep everyone believing he was someone he never truly was. One final piece of insight came from Daniel's former boss at Anderson and Stone Financial in Chicago. "He was the kind of employee you wish you could clone," the man said. "Always early, never missed a deadline, dressed sharp, respectful." But when Rachel went missing, he looked back at one odd conversation they'd had in late December. "He asked me if I thought some people were just born to be invisible. I laughed it off. But then he said, "Sometimes I wonder if the best life is the one no one notices. Where you can start over, whenever you want." 2 weeks later, Daniel was gone. Rachel was already dead. With the revelations mounting, Daniel Wallace's face became a symbol, not just of murder but of manipulation. He wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was a chameleon hiding in plain sight. And now he could be anyone. A rideshare driver. A barista. A new coworker at your office. Police continue to chase leads, but every new sighting has the same problem. Too many people look like Daniel. And as long as he's free, the question isn't just where he is. It's who he's pretending to be now. Subscribe now as we uncover the next chapter in this chilling manhunt, and help us continue producing true crime stories that reveal the darkness hiding in plain sight. The house was spotless. The fridge was full. The bed was made. But beneath the polished surfaces and neatly folded towels, something far more sinister was buried. A single hairline crack in the floorboards exposed a chilling secret. And when the police pulled up the kitchen tiles, the story that Daniel Parker had spent a decade building came crashing down, brick by bloodied brick. Detective Carla Jennings stared at the concrete slab beneath the kitchen floor, her breath catching in her throat. She'd seen her fair share of death, but this was different. The Parker home had always looked like something out of a glossy lifestyle magazine. Matching dinnerware, framed wedding photos, and little motivational plaques reading "Love Lives Here." But now, all that was overshadowed by the chilling discovery hiding beneath the tiles. It was the neighbor's dog that started it. A restless German shepherd named Duke, who had recently taken to growling and scratching at the Parkers' fence near the kitchen wall. Mrs. Ellerby, the retired schoolteacher next door, had mentioned it casually during her second police interview. "I don't know what's gotten into him," she had said. "He keeps sniffing that spot like he smells something foul. I thought maybe raccoons or rats, but he's never acted this way before." That clue led officers to bring in a cadaver dog. Within minutes, the trained shepherd began circling the kitchen floor, pawing and whining near the sink area. The concrete was newly poured, about 2 years old, just like the freezer that once held Julia's body. Daniel had been smart. He replaced the freezer after detectives first began asking questions. But he hadn't accounted for scent, nor had he considered that trauma leaves traces, both physical and psychological. The forensics team broke through the slab and found remnants. A blood-stained towel, hair strands, and the unmistakable stench of decomposed flesh that had once clung to the concrete. It was enough to reopen the house as a primary crime scene. Enough to shatter the illusion of perfection he'd so carefully curated. As police dug deeper, both literally and figuratively, Daniel's empire of lies began to unravel. In public, Daniel had always been the kind of man others envied. He helped organize block parties, made school donations under his wife's name, and never forgot a neighbor's birthday. But beneath that generous facade, there was a carefully guarded rage. Julia's sister, Melissa, had long suspected her brother-in-law wasn't what he appeared to be. "He never raised his voice in public," she said. "But Julia used to flinch when he touched her. You learn to spot that kind of thing when you've been around real love. And that wasn't it." Melissa's previous statements to police had been dismissed as grief-fueled speculation. But now her claims carried new weight. With the discovery of blood traces beneath the kitchen floor, investigators believed the freezer might not have been the first or only place Daniel stashed Julia's remains. They began looking into other properties he had visited around the time of her disappearance: vacation rentals, storage units, and construction sites. As digital forensic experts combed through GPS data from Daniel's truck, they discovered an alarming pattern. In the weeks following Julia's disappearance, he had made multiple trips to a remote patch of land he inherited from his uncle 3 years prior. It was time to dig again. The property was quiet, secluded, and surrounded by pine trees. A single shed stood on the lot, weathered but locked. Inside, officers found buckets of lime, heavy-duty gloves, and tarps, identical to the ones used in the original freezer concealment. More disturbingly, there were printed photographs, not of Julia but of other women, neighbors, a waitress, a yoga instructor, all smiling, oblivious to the fact that they were being watched. Detective Jennings stared at the images, trying to keep her lunch down. The case was no longer just about a murdered wife. It was beginning to look like the blueprint for something far more monstrous, a series of crimes Daniel might have been planning or worse, already attempted. Each piece of evidence revealed a new side of Daniel, a man whose charm masked a dangerous pathology. He hadn't just wanted to get rid of Julia. He wanted to erase her, to rebuild his life unburdened by the inconvenience of love and loyalty. But love leaves footprints, and Daniel's weren't as carefully erased as he thought. By now the town was in shock. Women who had once smiled politely at Daniel in line at the grocery store now changed aisles to avoid even his shadow. The media latched onto every detail: the suburban charmer who hid his wife in a freezer. News vans lined the Parker Street. Reporters clamored outside the courthouse. Daniel's legal team remained quiet. No plea deals, no interviews. Just cold, calculated silence. Back in court, Melissa provided a searing testimony about her sister's final days. She read from Julia's journal entries, pages the police had initially overlooked. Julia had written about feeling unsafe, about Daniel's emotional withdrawal, about hearing him whisper to himself late at night in the garage. One haunting line silenced the courtroom. "Sometimes I think Daniel's smile is the scariest thing about him, because I can never tell what's hiding behind it." Want to know what really shattered the mask Daniel wore, and how justice finally caught up with him? Subscribe now as we uncover the final chapter of this chilling story. He wore a navy blue suit, smiled faintly, and gave a slight nod to the jury, as if it were just another business meeting. But as prosecutors opened with a single photo, Julia's smiling face from her wedding day, the courtroom turned frigid. Behind the polished defense, behind the charming mask, was a man now exposed as a monster. And as the trial unfolded, Daniel Parker's final lie would be shattered by the very person he never saw coming. The trial of Daniel Parker began on a rainy Monday morning, as reporters huddled under umbrellas outside the Monroe County Courthouse. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Courtroom benches were packed, some with grieving family, others with curious spectators who couldn't believe the charming husband from the suburbs had become the face of cold-blooded murder. Daniel's defense team entered first, calm and composed. They had already begun floating a narrative to the press in the days leading up to trial. There is no direct proof Daniel killed his wife. Only circumstantial evidence. He is a grieving husband being crucified by a media frenzy. But prosecutors had something far more powerful than press conferences. They had Julia's voice, long silenced, now returned through pages of her journals, messages to her sister, and forensic evidence that painted a horrifying timeline. As the trial opened, District Attorney Sheila Harmon stood and looked straight into the jurors' eyes. The man sitting here did not lose his wife. He removed her. He erased her. He buried her under concrete and ice and lies, because her life was inconvenient to his image. Then she clicked the remote. The courtroom screen lit up with a photograph. Julia in her wedding dress, eyes full of hope, her hand intertwined with Daniel's. A murmur ran through the room. Over the following 2 weeks, the state built its case piece by piece. The freezer evidence. Although Julia's remains were discovered in a replacement freezer, forensic testing showed trace blood and tissue in a corner Daniel failed to clean entirely, along with a distinct DNA match to Julia. The concrete slab. Underneath the kitchen floor, cadaver dogs and forensic teams had found bloodstains soaked into the concrete, hair strands, and fibers matching the same blanket found with Julia's body. Digital footprints. GPS records from Daniel's phone showed frequent late-night trips to a wooded property he had never disclosed during initial interviews. There, detectives found lime, gloves, and surveillance images of other women, suggesting a calculated pattern of behavior. Journal entries. Julia's journal, discovered hidden behind a false panel in their closet, contained chilling entries about her growing fear of Daniel. In one, dated a week before she vanished, she wrote, "If something happens to me, please don't believe it was an accident." Neighbor testimonies. Multiple neighbors recounted the night they heard raised voices followed by silence. One saw Daniel dragging a large object through the garage around midnight. Melissa's testimony. Julia's sister, Melissa, took the stand for the second time and delivered a testimony that left the courtroom in tears. She spoke of Julia's emotional collapse, the sudden withdrawal from family, and a final phone call that ended with, "I don't feel safe here anymore." Daniel's lawyers tried to argue reasonable doubt. They claimed Julia may have left voluntarily and returned later, only to suffer a fatal accident in the garage, possibly electrocution or a fall. The freezer, they said, was a panic move from a man frightened and unsure how to handle the death of his estranged wife. But their theory had holes. Why the cleaned blood from the kitchen floor? Why the GPS data pointing to a remote shed with materials designed to conceal bodies? Why the surveillance photos of women who never knew they were being followed? And perhaps the biggest question: why didn't Daniel ever report Julia missing? Their defense crumbled under the weight of forensic science, digital trails, and Julia's own words from beyond the grave. In a twist no one saw coming, The prosecution called a surprise witness in the final week of the trial, Daniel's ex-girlfriend from college. Her name was Renee Mercer. She hadn't seen Daniel in over a decade, but when news broke about his arrest, something in her gut twisted. She remembered things, moments of sudden rage, gaslighting, and one night where she woke up with a black eye and no memory of what had happened. On the stand, she recalled Daniel's chilling words after a heated argument in their dorm. "No one will ever leave me. If they try, they disappear." Though she had no direct connection to Julia, her testimony corroborated a pattern. Daniel's need for control, his obsession with appearance, and his capacity for violence when the illusion was threatened. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Daniel, for the first time, showed emotion. Not anger, not guilt, but fear. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. On July 8, 2025, Daniel Parker was found guilty of first-degree murder, unlawful disposal of human remains, and obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. As Daniel was led away in handcuffs, Melissa stood clutching a small framed photo of her sister. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply whispered, "She can rest now." Julia's story ignited national discussions on coercive control, emotional abuse, and the dangers of charming facades. Her journals were published posthumously, with proceeds donated to domestic violence shelters under her name. Detective Jennings, who led the case, described it best. This wasn't just about one woman's murder. It was about the thousands of Julias whose cries are hidden behind smiles, until it's too late. If this story moved you, share Julia's voice. Like, comment, and subscribe to help us bring more untold truths into the light. And remember, behind every perfect smile, there might be a secret no one sees. Until someone finally listens.